Baldur's Gate 3 has been a smashing success, peaking at 800,000 concurrent players in its first weekend and racking up millions of sales since its initial early access launch. So it's clear that BG3 has brought tactical turn-based RPGs into the mainstream, but some players are struggling with the game's difficulty. In this video, we're going to discuss whether Baldur's Gate 3 is too hard and go into some of the things that make the learning curve for this game so steep for new players. What's up everyone, Big Dan here. I make videos on RPGs, and the other day I was perusing the Baldur's Gate 3 subreddit in search of some combat strategies for a particularly nasty fight when I stumbled upon this thread. This game is too hard. So let's dig into this because the post and comments are pretty interesting. I'm on the story mode setting, and I still hit walls everywhere in the story, constantly. I'm at a point where I can't even progress. I work my ass off all week. I don't like to play challenging games. It's just not my thing. I play games with a good story and good graphics. This game has both, and once you get used to the turn-style combat, it can be pretty fun. But I'm just frustrated at this point. I get making a game challenging, but not on the easy setting. The whole point of that setting is for people like me who don't want a challenge. It's just super annoying. So let's unpack this, starting with the difficulty modes. Baldur's Gate 3 has 3 different difficulty settings: Explorer, Balanced, and the hardest mode called Tactician. According to the descriptions, Balanced is a balanced adventure full of challenging choices. An Explorer is a narrative experience placing story before combat. I have tested the game on the Balanced and Explorer difficulties so far, and I gotta say, fights can still be punishing even on the lowest difficulty setting. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is different from easy modes in other games, many of which will make you practically invincible on the lowest setting. In a lot of games, you'd pretty much have to die IRL and stop controlling your character to actually die in the game. But in Baldur's Gate 3, you can still get hit with a deadly combo that one-shots your character before you even take a turn on Explorer difficulty. In Larian's design, placing the narrative experience before combat does not mean that combat encounters can be pursued carelessly. You still need a bit of strategy to persevere, but I will say with practice and a bit of game knowledge, you can overcome any challenge the game throws your way. So let's take a look at some of the reactions to this post. There are almost 200 comments, some providing tips, but others echoing the same sentiment. Playing balanced mode myself, and I'm not a stranger to CRPGs, but damn, this game is unfairly brutal. Every fight is a massive struggle, and I feel incredibly weak. Something is wrong with the balance of this game. There is no way balanced means every single fight is brutally hard. I get high ground, pre-buff, etc. I constantly miss the enemy, they constantly hit me. I do single-digit damage, they do double-digit, and I feel incredibly weak. I'm playing balanced mode, the default setting, and every fight is just stupidly hard. This game needs a balance pass, or a better way of getting players used to the mechanics. At this point, I am completely done with the game, and I'm just at the Goblin Fort. I totally agree. I played Divinity Original Sin 2 on the hardest setting and was able to get pretty far. Even on balanced mode, Baldur's Gate 3 is a lot harder. So there's a lot to unpack here, but one point I definitely agree with is that the game does a poor job of teaching the player the mechanics of the game. I personally came into this game with quite a bit of experience in RPGs, but almost no experience with Dungeons & Dragons or hardcore tactical turn-based RPGs. I think one of the big challenges for new players is that Baldur's Gate 3 has quite a steep learning curve for those unfamiliar with dice-based D&D combat and strategy, and the game doesn't do a whole lot to teach the player what they need to succeed. You're basically given a couple of text pop-ups telling you how to move your characters, and a few other concepts here and there, and then the game is like, good luck, son! Had they tutorialized a few more game mechanics, such as the importance of taking the high ground, launching surprise attacks, and options for crowd control, I think that would go a long way to getting players up to speed. They could have blended these things into the introduction by having our character sneak onto a balcony and use throwable items on the enemy. As it stands, the early game fights don't really teach you much about what your options are in combat. You pretty much have to learn everything on your own through trial and error or online guides. This game has a lot to learn. armor class, modifiers, status effects, saving throws, terrain, positioning advantages, stealth mechanics, saving throws, throwable items, consumable items, concentration, and the list goes on. It can be difficult to get up to speed on all the mechanics if you're new to Dungeons & Dragons, and if you're getting wiped in combat, it can be perplexing to even understand what mistakes you might be making. Let's compare Baldur's Gate 3 with another notoriously difficult series, the Souls games. Dark Souls, Elden Ring, and games of that nature have a lot of similarities to BG3. You're thrown into the world with minimal tutorials, and the combat punishes you brutally for mistakes. But the difference with Souls games is that the combat is much more intuitive. If a giant boss enemy smacks you with a big-ass halberd, you immediately understand, oh, I got hit. Next time I need to dodge out of the way or try using a shield or parrying or something like that. The combat isn't necessarily easy, but it is simple and intuitive to understand. On the other hand, Baldur's Gate 3 is much more complex and not necessarily intuitive at a glance. If you get hit with an attack or status effect, it's not always clear what you can do to mitigate that in the future without poring over the combat logs. Let's say, for instance, an enemy attacks you and causes you to drop your weapon. What even happened here, and what can you do in the future to prevent it? You have to dig into the details to find out, and that is going to be a roadblock to learning, especially for casual players. I'm not necessarily saying this is a bad thing. Not every game needs to appeal to casual players, and Larian is right to design difficult games if they want to. But since this game has reached a mainstream appeal, it is causing friction for some players who are completely new to this type of game. We saw a similar thing with Diablo 4, where a lot of casual players were like, wait, I have to re-level my character from scratch every season? What the hell do I want to do that for? Is the game basically just an endless loop of grinding? Meanwhile, experienced ARPG players were like, yeah, of course, dude, it's an ARPG. They're all like this. I think another big factor that can contribute to frustration is that literally everything in the game is determined by RNG. There are dice rolls for every single combat action, skill check, and more, so two identical encounters can play out entirely differently simply due to luck. The strategy comes into play when you think about how to improve your odds with gear, buffs, the environment, and more, but at the end of the day, we're all at the mercy of the mighty D20, and she is a fickle goddess indeed. I've been having a blast with Baldur's Gate 3, and I've also died a lot in many combat encounters. But even as an inexperienced TTRPG player, I still found a way to get past every encounter so far, and I recently completed Act 2. My only gripe is that some of the combat encounters just have way too many enemies. Like, is it really necessary to be outnumbered 5-1? I think you need to chill on some of these, Larian. While Baldur's Gate 3 can be challenging and even frustrating sometimes, if you persevere, it is an incredibly rewarding experience. If you're struggling with the combat, look up guides, read comments in forums and Reddit, and don't be afraid to use good old trial and error. The game takes time to learn, and if you're looking to just breeze through the whole thing mindlessly without any challenge, then you're probably going to have a bad time. So what has your experience been with Baldur's Gate 3 so far? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to Big Dan Gaming for more RPG videos. Big shout out to all the channel members for supporting my content. Until next time, this has been Big Dan. I should go.